So hi everyone, thank you for being here, and I would like to thank the organizers for the fascinating job that they have made in organizing the event and for giving us the opportunity to share our project. I come from a philosophy perspective, so I'm gonna address the subject of matter from a completely different perspective. Um, I'm a PhD candidate at Erasmus University and a philosophy instructor at American University of Beirut. Since I'm addressing this from a philosophy perspective, I would like to start first with the most famous of them all, Socrates. In one of his dialogues where he was addressing the nature of language, he claims, "You do not suppose that you can learn any subject of importance at any moment, at any rate, not such a subject and language, which is perhaps the very greatest of all." So I'm going to be addressing the question at matter from a philosophy of language perspective, specifically on focusing on oral history. For this reason, the database that I rely on is the Palestinian Oral History Archives that are published in Jaffet Library at AUB. So I decided first to start with two testimony givers that were recorded in an interview in 1997. One of them claims, "عار علينا نترك بلدنا," shame on us if we leave our homeland. The other one claims that "هيدا واجبي لازم أقوم فيه," which is "this is my duty and I must fulfill it." Both of these testimony givers lived in Akka in 1948. What I want to point out here at looking at these testimonies is that these testimonies do not function as a way to convey information only, but rather they assert a certain form of an action. So by saying these words, the testimony giver are actually performing a certain action. This is where we call it in philosophy, where saying is doing. The action in question, which we're going to later on refer to it as the force of the sentence, is mainly here a sense of resistance or a sense of resilience that can be conveyed by using specific words. This project aims to argue that oral testimonies in oral history function as speech acts. This is a case where saying is doing, and seeks to identify the linguistic and the social challenges that are inherent in the digitization of oral history. In order to do that, I'm going to first introduce what the theory of speech act is and apply it on oral testimonies. In the second section, with my limited though present understanding of NLP, I'm going to talk about the importance of the digitization of humanities. And in the last section, I'm going to discuss the epistemic and the discursive challenges. The speech act theory is actually authored by J.L. Austin, who is a philosopher in the 20th century, where in a collection of lectures at Oxford University, he presents his book, which is How to Do Things with Words. In this lecture, he identifies the force of an action as the illocutionary act. So here I'm quoting from his lectures. The utterance of a sentence is part of the doing of an action, and the action that is performed, we're going to call it the illocutionary act. So here speech is used as a normative vehicle that aim at instituting certain social changes. So by asserting someone's resistance, what someone is doing is they are asserting a change in the status quo. By asserting someone's resilience as well, what they aim to do is to perform a specific action that changes the status quo. Since speech on its own is going to be seen as normative, therefore it has a set of input, a set of output, along with the illocutionary force in question. This set of input has to do with the context in question, and here you're going to see how later on this is going to be related to the meaning and the pragmatics of the sentence. So it has to do with who is the speaker, what's the historical background of the subject that they are talking about. The output is the normative change that they aim to institute, and the force is actually captured in the output. This is the act that is performed. So if you want to apply this trichotomy on the oral testimonies that I have provided earlier, Fatime, for example, to talk about the second testimony giver, is a proper testimony giver in a collection of archives that aim to provide the oral history of Palestinians since pre-1948. Therefore, her set of inputs are successfully met. What she is trying to do by mentioning this testimony is to perform an act of resistance, and this can be seen as the force of her sentence. The reason why I am dealing with this from a linguistic perspective is to show the complexities of having a semantic theory, which might be a difficult problem to be dealt with in NLPs. So to move on to the indeterminacy of hermeneutics, it is the case that not every utterance has the same illocutionary force. So not every utterance has a specific meaning, but dependent on the context, what's going to happen is the force of the utterance as well is going to change. So quoting from Searle, the illocutionary force of an utterance determines the type of the act that is performed. A single sentence can be used by varying illocutionary force. So when I say, for example, when I ask you about the weather and you reply, it's raining, I take your assertion as reporting a fact. When a child asks her father whether she can play outside and he replies by the same sentence, it's raining, here the meaning of what is said is a rejection to the proposal in question. So the more we understand the scene, the better we will be able to understand the actual force that follows from the utterance in question. The reason why I am saying, I'm talking about the plasticity of semantic value is to indicate the coupling between words and society and understanding the semantic account of the sentence in question. And therefore, to give the narrative a symptomatic reading, which takes into consideration not only the words that are being uttered, but also the different non-verbal cues that here, if you refer to the work of a philosopher, Viviane Boone, when she claims that in the narrative, there are certain forms of trauma markers, such as silences, a change of voice intonation, a loss of emotional control, and a change in body language. In trauma markers, the ability to accurately express oneself linguistically often collapses. And this is why a lot of psychiatrists will claim that trauma is a pre-narrative condition. It's a condition where most of it can be seen in verbal cues, but a lot of it come in non-verbal cues. So to read the narrative properly is to discover the relation with all of these non-verbal markers that play a role in kind of determining the force of the utterance that is mentioned. Applying this to the digitization of oral history, and please try to take it with a pinch of salt. Again, it's one of the fields that I'm interested in. My work mainly is in the language part of it. So to fully capture the spoken language, it's often more effective to listen to the recordings. So for example, my work is on philosophy of oral history. Since I'm a native Arabic speaker, I can go to the Palestinian oral history archives. Through their use of oral history metadata synchronizer, I can have the opportunity to access these oral testimonies in a friendly user way, where I can use the keywords that I am searching for. And by clicking on the keyword, they can directly give me the segment in the recording that is directly related to my own research. So this provides us with a new opportunity that makes the access to oral testimonies user-friendly. In POHA, we have a database that preserves more than 1,000 hours of testimonies that are narrated by first-generation Palestinians and other Palestinian communities that are displaced in Lebanon. The problem with the metadata synchronizer is the alienation of the non-native researcher. It's the case that most of the researchers are not very proficient in the language. And this is where I think the importance of NLP plays an essential role in the digitization of humanities. So if we adopt a formalist approach to natural language, which Frege and Russell adopted, it seemed plausible that any form of algorithm could accurately depict the semantics of speech. So if we assume that logic is kind of the core of language, then that will be a complicated task, but an easier task than the pragmatic sense. However, given that we do not take this approach, the task of preserving the natural language of oral testimonies becomes significantly more complex. As previously noted, the context that is verbal and non-verbal, it plays an indispensable role in determining the semantic value of that which is said. So the initial model must be, first of all, capable of converting speech into text. And once we have, if we want to stop at the phonetics component of the segment, we can talk about transcription of words into written words. But since the challenge extends beyond phonetics, morphology, and syntax to encompass the semantics and the pragmatics, therefore we need an NLP model that incorporates deep learning architecture and techniques in order to capture the multi-layers of meaning. This deep learning in natural language processing features multi-dimensional approach that assists the reader in interpreting the speaker's intended meaning. So to capture the normative aspect of discourse, deep learning seems to be essential here. I want to go back to my own discipline and focus on an oral historian whose name is Portelli. In the peculiarity of oral testimonies, he claimed, writing reduces language to segmentary traits, letters, syllables, words, and phrases. But language also composed of another set of traits which cannot be reduced within a single segment, but are also bearers of meaning, such as tonal range, volume, rhythm of speech, carry connotation, which are not reproducible in writing. This is why, like, fine-tuning certain models for sentiment analysis makes it possible to identify emotional tones within testimonies, such as anger and fear and more, and the dual capacity for generating concise summaries on one hand and conducting sentiment analysis on another hand would therefore equip the researcher to have a proper understanding that kind of capture the nuances of that which is said. So if you want to go back to these testimonies, if we claim that the testimony giver is uttering shame on us to leave our country with a tone of sadness and helplessness, then we can convey that the narrator feels forcibly displaced and has a certain form of helplessness towards the situation in question. If the narrator uses the same utterance, but with a certain form of anger and assertiveness, then the hermeneutics that follow from that would be completely different. So to end this with the different biases, and again, to repeat this, approaching these biases from a philosophy perspective that has to do with epistemic and discursive identity powers, I talked about two challenges. The first challenge has to do with the epistemic challenge, and the second one is the discursive challenge. Miranda Fricker, in her book on testimonial injustice, identifies identity power as follow. It's a form of social power which is directly dependent upon shared social imaginative conceptions of social identities of those implicated in the particular operation of power. These constructed social identities, such as being labeled as a refugee or an Arab or a Palestinian, create prejudice that impact how individuals are perceived, and not only how individuals are perceived, but also how the testimonies of these individuals are interpreted. Such biases are not exclusive to human interaction, but also they extend to the AI realm. The NLP models under consideration build implicatures that are based on social patterns. And if in the social patterns we have certain form of identity power and prejudice, then these identity power and prejudice are going to be replicated in the output. Which gives us a certain form of testimonial injustice, which is when the prejudice, such as being labeled as such, causes a hearer to give a deflated level of credibility to a speaker's word. This is specifically important in the case of oral history, because these testimonies that are given are actually testimonies that take part in history. So this has to do with the epistemic challenge. The last challenge that I want to address is the discursive challenge. Again, from my discipline in philosophy of language, specifically.
Zainab,
Yeah.
how much time do you need? Because
4 more minutes or less. I'm already.
yeah, we need to have some time for a question, so please try to
Okay.
speak.
Okay. The last one has to do with certain words that are resistant to translation and to the importance of meshing different dialects together. So only through recognizing these complexities that we can strive for an epistemic practice that respects the speaker's voice and specifically their testimonies. Thank you, and I'm sorry that I went over time.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for a very interesting talk. questions? We have a lot of questions,
Yeah.
including Nizar, please.
Actually, I'm gonna ask a question. If you can go over the last slide that you went over very quickly. If you can just explain this a little bit more, please. Thank you. Because this sounds really interesting from my point of view. Yeah.
Okay. The first one has to do with there are certain words that are resistant to translation. So we're having this conference, and the conference is in English, right? And even our writings are using the English language, but we still use nakba, which is an Arabic language. So there are certain words that their semantics is completely dependent on the context in question that resist any form of translation. The second one has to do with the different dialects that are present in testimonies. So here I talk about what is natural about natural language, because it seems that different dialects would come up with a different form of language.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yeah.
More questions? Actually, I like you really your talk. Yeah, Tariq, please.
Thank you.
I will be the last one to ask. Okay.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Thank you so much, Zainab, for this presentation. I was curious if you could talk, so you're drawing on speech act theory, about if you could talk a bit about the idea of felicity. So Austin is talking about, when you have a descriptive statement, you can say it's true or false. But when there's a speech act, it's sort of like, does it work or does it not work? Is it accepted? And so in what context or how, when might we say that oral testimony works? What does it mean for it to work?
Thank you so much for your question. I actually deal with this question in another paper. So Austin does identify felicity conditions where the Speech Act would fail to perform. Here, the felicity conditions can be seen in the input, which is the set of entitlements. In a very practical sense, if our archive is about Palestinian oral history for the ones who survived 1948, we need someone who actually survived 1948 and who was there in Palestine. That's practically speaking. On a deeper level, we need someone who has a proper memory that is reliable, because oral history is based on eyewitness testimonies, which are kind of stored in memory. So here I talk about the importance of memory reliability as one of the most essential felicity conditions in oral history. So these are the two. I hope I answered your concern. Yeah.
Okay. Other questions? Okay, so I will ask my question. Actually, Zainab, this is really interesting talk. I don't know if you are aware or not, when you say NLP, especially these days, the large language models are based on a theory called distributional semantics, which says that words that are used or occur in the same context have similar meanings.
Yeah.
So are you aware of, first of all, with this theory, with the distributional semantic theory, or not?
I'm aware of it from, let's say, from my own perspective, but not from the technical side of it.
Would you please comment on this, because you are trying now to, let's say, evaluate how much large language models understand real world semantics, maybe.
Yeah.
And by the way, Noam Chomsky, I think he agrees with most of what you said. If you also can comment on this.
Yeah. So in the distributional sense, you're saying that the semantic of the same words is always the same. It's static. It gives us the same meaning.
So if you use the word, for example, car, and taxi, so and because they are used in similar contexts most of the time, statistically speaking, they have really very similar semantics.
That's true.
It's not exact. They don't have to be synonyms. For example, soldier and army. So most of the time are used on similar contexts, and therefore they share many features, we call them, and therefore statistically speaking, so if you collect lots of corpora, lots of text, and you analyze it, so you find that words that occur in similar context have similar meaning. And
Yeah,
therefore, I believe that to a certain extent, of course, that large language models are able to understand, to capture
yeah,
the intended meaning sometimes.
exactly.
I want to hear your perspective on this because you are a philosopher, so.
I agree with you on this side because at the end of the day, there are certain social patterns that relate to the word, to its meaning. And given these patterns, therefore, the more we mention this word in that specific context, then every time that it's used, it's going to have that specific meaning. So here I'm going to focus on the concept of output. So output is the conventional kind of consequence of what one says. Conventionally speaking, we understand that when someone says هيدا واجبي لازم أقوم فيه, they are kind of exclaiming their duty towards their homeland because we're familiar of the context in question. So when it comes to output, I fully agree with you in terms of the social patterns that are there, because at the end of the day, we don't want to completely say that semantics are out of hand. They're completely indeterminate, because there are certain social patterns that govern the semantics in question. But here I want just the lucidity or the flexibility to be about the set of input, which not only is about the context that is historical and so, but it's also about a context that is like non-verbal, right? That's gonna determine the meaning. That doesn't follow patterns, but rather follow lived experience.
Okay, Nizar, you have the last question. Because...
Yeah, okay. It's on more actually of I love this conversation. Wish we could have longer conversations about these, but just a couple of thoughts on the language usage. I mean, two examples come to mind. One, that I've used in the past from a morphological point of view is the word muhtal, which has two meanings, the occupier and the occupied. And so when you talk about the dual al-muhtalla, you don't actually know which one you're talking about, which occupied or occupying. And this is kind of an interesting challenge from an NLP point of view, in essence of saying, what is the meaning of that word, even in the same context, right? So that kind of adds another wrench in the middle of it, like the data in Arabic. And this example is exactly pronounced the same way. It's not a diacritical difference. So that kind of leaves a lot of questions. And the other one is just kind of the cultural expectations or specificity, which I interpreted some of your language. I admit my vocabulary in terms of the philosophical discussion is not maybe at the level that I would have loved it to be, but I understood a lot of what you were saying. The example that comes to mind was things like expressions like احترم نفسك, right? Or respect yourself, which in English has a completely radically different meaning from the Arabic intended meaning, right? I mean, as you know, so it just kind of, I would love to kind of know, like, what can we do, in fact, to be able to annotate in a way that allow us to actually, build systems that can allow us to actually achieve the goals that you are looking for? Because it sounds like a really hard task.
Definitely. Yeah. Especially with the challenges that one faces in translation as well. Thank you so much for your example. It's actually, very enlightening for my topic.
Okay, so we will leave it with so exciting discussion.
Yeah.
I just, last sentence I will say. There is growing area of research now. It's called neurosymbolic research, neurosymbolic models. Large language models that understand neuro, which refers to distributional semantics, but symbolic, which refers to symbolic semantics, or that based on logic. So this is very interesting. Thank you very much. So